Have you guys had a chance to see Dragon Slayer yet?
I love
Melinda?
Dragon. I've seen it before. I love it.
Yeah, Michael sort of gave me a lecture about that one after the...
I haven't. We've watched it together.
Yeah, that's what the
There
lecture
are
was.
parallels to the two, but I think
You
as
can talk
far
about
as execution and special effects, once again, big fan of Harryhausen, but...
Oh,
You know,
it's me, the ghost of
folks-
Harryhausen. I'm so glad to hear from you again, Tom.
What they did with
me.
what they did with that dragon and stuff, and the introduction of Go Motion and stuff like that, because that was the first time they introduced Go Motion in like an animated kind of creature or ship.
Yep.
It was awesome. It was amazing.
Yep. They did where they advanced the physical model like a certain degree too, so you got that motion blur going on
and
with
it holds up today, I think. I haven't watched it. I may have another opinion if I do watch it now.
Oh, God
My
forbid. Please don't watch
crabby-
anything else
crabby
you like. Please
Yeah,
just never
my
watch
crabby
things you
self.
like again.
I've got it on DVD, and we watched it several years back, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I mean, the one thing that's off-putting about that movie is the fact that both the villain and the hero have these massive merms. Like, they have these big man perms.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And
do you think
the
about
thing is,
manly merm?
our hero is hiding behind a shield made of dragon scales.
Right.
And that hair is hanging right over that shield, man.
That's
You're
right.
gonna lose that hair. You're gonna be running out of that cave looking like Telly Savalas in about 5 seconds.
Who loves you, baby?
You know what I love about this conversation is that if I include it at the beginning of the podcast, it's just going to sound like Tom's been talking about Clash of the Titans since the last podcast he was on.
Nothing has changed. I've just been sitting in a corner of my house going,
rocking back and forth.
yeah.
Clash of the Titans. Clash of the Titans.
Welcome, everyone, to Dreamland, the RetroBlasting podcast. I am your first host, Melinda, and across from me is your other first host, Aaron. That's the new thing.
That's my name.
And
You
joining
guys
us,
is number one.
that's right.
is.
We're both number one. And joining us tonight on the Skype is Tom Berges from I Grew Up Star Wars. Hello, Tom.
Hi, everybody.
And sitting right across from me in his wool World War II style jacket is Michael French. Hello, Michael.
Hi.
On the tallest chair in the house.
All right, so tonight we are going to be talking about the dark times of Star Wars. And we're not talking about the comic book that's called Star Wars: The Dark Times. We're talking about the years between Return of the Jedi and either the special editions or the prequels, whichever one you count as the resurrection of Star Wars in the late 90s. So both of our guests tonight are huge, lifelong fans of Star Wars. Tom from when it actually came out, and Michael from his earliest memories of he saw it when he was really, really young. So,
Well, before people get the idea into their heads that means that I was like, some kid that saw it in like 1990 on
no.
video cassette.
You're old.
Thank you.
You're old like all of us.
I you can't help when you're born, but I'm
Sure.
grateful that I was born before The Empire Strikes
You're
Back.
a 70s kid,
yes.
just like all of us.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We're all 70s kids here. I don't know. Aaron, are you a 70s?
I am.
Okay,
for the third time.
I can't remember dates. I didn't fail history.
I don't
but
seem like one, though, because a lot of my experience was later in the 80s, early 90s, that kind of stuff. So
That's why I ask, because you seem a lot younger than me sometimes. You're so youthful looking and pretty, Aaron.
I think what you mean to say is that I'm very immature. I think is what you're trying to...
Well, I think everyone in this room is immature, but
Yeah,
I
ain't
mean that in
the
a good
truth?
way. Real quickly, in case there are people listening who are not familiar with you guys' background with Star Wars, Tom, can you tell us just really briefly how you became familiar with Star Wars and what your first experiences were?
First experience was back in 77 or possibly the re-release in 78.
Mm-hmm.
A buddy of mine, friend of mine, Robbie Kyle, spending the evening with him, and he told me about this cool movie that he had watched a few days before, and he went over the whole script of Star Wars and all the awesome stuff that was happening in it. And
so he
the
spoiled
weekend,
it all for you immediately?
He did a great job. Hand gestures and scrunching his face up to look like a stormtrooper and all that good stuff.
Wow. Cool.
Sorry for the visual, but there you go.
No, that's good. And
it's a podcast; it's not a TV show. But it was awesome.
Visually.
And then the weekend after I got a chance to watch Star Wars for the very first time, and it was amazing. So that's I've been a lifelong fan since.
I can see that happening. And then Michael, go ahead and tell us your first.
It was 1982, and I was at I was only 4, so. But I remember everything vividly, and I was at the house of some family friends. They were the Berkeley family, and my parents had brought us over because my parents were what? I was 82, so they had just turned 31. I mean, so they were young back then, and they just had.
Imagine that.
Well, no, I'm saying they were meeting up with some friends to play cards, and
that's what young people did in the early 80s.
I know.
Usually it's bridge with a little gin.
It was cards or a board game or something, but so they went over there, and Mr. Berkeley was kind of like a bleeding edge AV guy. Like, he loved his home theater, and he had one of those big televisions that had the projection unit in the front.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, with the color guns that would...
Wow.
It looked like a boat. It looked like a boat with a big sail.
Yes, exactly. And
God forbid you knock one of those color guns out of alignment because...
Yeah, because that thing sat in the center of the room, and then you had to sit right in the center of the couch. And he had one of those big 80s sectionals, because it was like, this is my home theater. And he had the hi-fi, hooked up to it and stuff. And somehow he had gotten his hands on a really nice Betamax copy, because he had Betamax, of Star Wars. And they all thought, well, Michael really loves movies, and he doesn't, he's not going to get hyper. He will sit there and watch the whole movie. So what's this Star Wars movie? It sounds like something Michael would like. And he was like, yeah, let's put it in for him if he's never seen it. And so I sat there, and just watched this movie unfold in front of me, and the Star Destroyer going over, and the C-3PO wandering through the desert, and Luke and Leia and the Death Star over the pit, the chasm and stuff. And it was just amazing. Like, it was just amazing. So that's how it all got started for me.
So for both of you, both being somewhat different ages, it really captured your imagination. And so just to fill in the blanks, you then, aside from just watching the films, which was a little more challenging back then. I mean, eventually you got VHS and you could sort of rewatch, or maybe you had a VHS machine and you could videotape it off of TV at some point and watch it over and over. But it was the toys. You ended up, eventually the toys came out, right, Tom? And they weren't out the first year, but then they came out, and so there was that. And then, there was a wide variety of other peripheral merchandise, as we are all very familiar with. And until, we get to Return of the Jedi, and, that movie was huge. And that was I don't know if it was the first movie I saw, but I definitely saw that one in the theater with my dad.
Same here with my grandmother.
Right.
Nice.
So
I remember loving Yoda. I think that's what was my big takeaway. It was just Yoda. It was the coolest thing ever.
I thought Luke was amazing in that movie, the beginning. Like him in the black, just being a badass and everything like that. So, but anyway, so after that movie came out, and it seemed like within a year, Star Wars started to dissipate. But I was not a super fan. I was a fan of the movie, and I really liked it, and I never really stopped liking it. But I also wasn't carrying around a torch in my everyday life thinking about Star Wars. But from knowing both of you, Michael and Tom, I know that the two of you did on some level. And so I guess what I want to focus on tonight is, what was that like during those times? Like right after Jedi, let's start there. Were you waiting for another movie? Like what were those first few years like after that movie?
Tom, I'll let you take it.
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I remember still, having the toys. By then I was 13. So Star Wars is still around as far as merchandise goes until 85 and maybe slightly beyond with the Ewok movies and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I never watched No, I did watch the Ewok movies because they came out on the TV. Mm-hmm. So I did catch those.
So what did you think of those movies at the time? Were you...
Well, as you might guess, my interest in Star Wars was waning as I was getting older and more interested in other stuff. So, but Star Wars was, as far as the toys and stuff, I still had that around. I wasn't about to get rid of those.
Right.
That took $19.99 and then, eBay for me to sell my complete entire childhood collection, which I'm still kicking my own ass for.
Yeah.
But as far as that goes, there was still stuff floating around. I would watch the movie on VCR all the time, and the whole trilogy, and Indiana Jones, of course, and you had versions of it when it came out. You had pirated copies, and so there was still a lot of interest. But as far as like mainstream interest and having your buddies talk about Star Wars and playing with the toys and stuff, that waned quickly, pretty much after, the last movie came out.
Right. What about you, Michael?
It was weird because I saw Return of the Jedi in the theater in '83. I was 5 years old, and I really wanted to continue having Star Wars movies. I wanted to have, more films, more toys, more this, more that. Because I was already collecting the toys ravenously at that point. I mean, it was a thing. And it was weird because 85 comes along, and between 83 and 85, the toys were still being sold and they were making new stuff. So, the next year I could ask for something else. Like, in 83 I wanted Jabba the Hutt, and then in 84 I was actually going out trying to find all the Empire Strikes Back stuff I could find, because I unfortunately had the experience of seeing Empire Strikes Back last. I had the read-along cassette for it, so I knew what happened in the movie. But because of being 5 and not having the ability to drive yourself and rent your own movies, it took a while for me to get my parents to bring that movie home. And so then I saw that, and I was after those. But new things were coming out too, like the Imperial Shuttle was brought out by Kenner in 84, and then, in 85 they brought out the Power of the Force line, and I was getting like Han and Carbonite and Luke Endor, and, other toys were starting to come in, but I was still very much wanting the Star Wars experience. Nothing matched Star Wars. Like, nothing could get to that level. Like, it was, G.I. Joe's all right, or, I guess Mask is okay, but it's not Star Wars. Like, there was nothing close. And so in 85, I remember my mom had to take me to see an allergist. And before she did, because we were going to do all this testing, back then the testing was like 15 syringes in each arm or something like that. And so she took me to Toys R Us. May it almost rest in peace, I guess, based on recent news.
I know.
Right.
But she
took
too
soon, Michael.
She took me to Toys R Us. This was in early summer of 85. And she said, I want to get you something, because you're going to the doctor today and all this kind of stuff. And we go into the Star Wars aisle, and toy stores back then, the aisles were dominated by this stuff. Like, any line that was big, floor to ceiling, wall to wall, it was that thing, And so Star Wars had its own aisle. And I'll never forget.
It was like your favorite trench run.
Yes, it was.
You could just stand there for hours looking at all the stuff.
Looking at everything with the pegboards that had the big toys out zip tied to them so that you could see what they looked like. And I'll never forget, I don't have many memories from being in toy stores that are that vivid. I remember going to them. I remember what they are. But this one was particularly vivid because when we turned the corner to the Star Wars aisle, there were just red tags all over everything. Like, it was this red tag explosion. And I was like, I remember as a kid thinking, this can't be good. Like, I didn't really know what it all meant. But the only things that weren't on red tag were the Star Wars Ewoks and Droids toys, which were new that year. But everything else was red tagged. And I was just like, this...
Meaning the cartoons?
Yes.
Like the merchandise?
Ewoks and Droid cartoon-related toys were not red tagged, but everything else was red tagged. And I picked up a B-Wing fighter. But then after that, like I said, a few later figures trickled in here and there, and that was it. And then it was over. And there was no up until that point, Star Wars toys were never red tagged. They were always sold at the retail price. And so then they started to disappear from the stores. There was less and less representation. And it just started to go away. I mean, it was just kind of,
Yeah, I mean, as someone who wasn't actively paying attention to it, it was like one day I looked around and there was no more Star Wars.
Right.
It just sort of, before I realized it, it was gone.
It was gone.
And there were like tumbleweeds blowing down those toy aisles where that used to be.
Right.
And I don't know, do you remember that at all, Aaron? Or
I definitely remember walking down the aisles and seeing the toys. My family wasn't as keen on purchasing a bunch of plasticky things to have around the house, so I didn't have quite the same longing when I went down there, other than just going, "Oh, that's cool, that's cool." I definitely know that the Imperial shuttle was probably the coolest ship in my mind from that time period. That thing had a look to it like a Porsche. And I remember pretending every other toy I had was that toy. But, definitely at some point it just sort of started to feel vacant. And like the hope was gone. We didn't know what we do now about how media companies work and what the signs are. It just took a while to sort of start dawning on me that this stuff was going away and we had no idea when we'd see it again. Right.
And like Tom, I watched the Ewok movies on TV when they were originally broadcast.
Now, did you like – I know Tom sort of touched on this, but did you like the Ewoks in Return of the Jedi when you saw the movie originally? Were you cool with, because Jedi, I know people will get defensive about this, and it's not even a criticism, it's just an observation that movie has a slightly different tone than the other two films in that trilogy. And so, as a kid, I know you were only 4, Michael, but Tom was certainly old enough to sense it. I would think, did you sort of feel like it was a little more, to use Michael's term, toddlery, or did you?
Being 12, any Star Wars movie that was coming out was worth it. It didn't matter what it was.
Okay.
And I'm not a big fan of the prequels, but it's funny that you mentioned that and that I think about it. If I was 12, which I loved, to answer your question, I loved Return of the Jedi. There was nothing wrong with it. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. The Ewoks were great. Jabba's palace were great. The fact that all the figures had sticks, I had a problem with.
Yeah.
But it's funny because if I was 12 years old, I probably wouldn't have minded Jar Jar. Good grief. Yeah, well, the whole political thing in the episode 1 might not have gotten me too much. But as far as just having a Star Wars movie when I was still young enough to incredibly appreciate it and just pine for it, because, back then, the movies were three years apart, and then we knew, or we pretty much figured that once Return of the Jedi came and left, that was going to be it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you could take what you could get, and Return of the Jedi did not disappoint. And as far as ending the trilogy the way it did, it was satisfying, incredibly satisfying, I think. But as far as the toys and collecting and stuff like that, I have to admit, I left before the toys left. So I'm the one that gave up on Star Wars. Star Wars didn't give up on me.
So were you going on to do like BMX? Like were you just, just
girls BMX.
Right.
That kind of thing. But mostly BMX, it was BMX and just moving on to, to stuff like that.
When we talked about BMX, Tom, you talked a lot about riding your bikes through the woods. I have to imagine, even when you were the cool kid on your BMX bike and you're cruising through those tall woods up there in Washington, you had to have been kind of imagining you were on a speeder bike a couple of times.
Oh, did I maybe fail to mention that on the BMX
I think so.
I don't think it came up.
I don't think you said that. Nope.
Yeah, well, we had a trail that led from my house, and it's now a nice nature trail that's actually paved and everything, and it's about a mile long. And my friends and I used to come barreling through there when it was just maybe 2 feet. 2 feet wide, the trail.
Sweet.
Still the length, but of course we would drive through there and, we'd start and go, speeder bikes all the way. And then we'd, pour it on and brush through all those trees and stuff. Yeah. So, we totally did that.
Yeah, I saw the Return of the Jedi on its 85 re-release as well. So when it came out 2 years later, I went back to see it again, and the projector went out while Obi-Wan and Luke were talking on Dagobah, and then they had to start it back up. We got the movie finally got finished, but back then the mechanics of a movie theater were sometimes a little spotty. But but I remember that very vividly. And then afterwards, my parents, I think they intrinsically knew that I wasn't going to let this go. They just kind of knew, and so in '87. There was, Tom will remember this, there was this brief kind of, Star Wars was officially dead at that point, but they still made sure to celebrate the 10th anniversary with like a video cassette release and a few other pieces,
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And there was a poster. I didn't know about the poster as a child because I wasn't going to places where they sold posters. But one of the things I did happen to get in the mail and then begged my parents for, I must have been the only 9-year-old kid that was getting these things. I admit it was, I don't remember, was it the Hamilton collection or the Franklin Mint? They sent out a 10th anniversary Star Wars collector
Oh, yeah, we got those
series.
upstairs.
Yeah, I still got them. And I begged and begged because the first plate was Han Solo. And he's sitting there in the cantina. The artwork on it was gorgeous, and so I was like, Mom, can I please? And this was the 80s. We were very middle class, and split level house, and my mom was just like, well, I know he really loves Star Wars, so we're going to do this. And so she started subscribing to get these plates. And, I remember the plates would show up, and I think I actually posted some of this footage, Tom, on I Grew Up Star Wars that I found on a video cassette of me with the video camera telling everybody at the time about the plates.
So you've had a YouTube
I think you
channel.
did. I think you did.
Before
yeah.
YouTube.
Yeah, I was really, it was like the full format VHS camcorder, and you hear me with my terrible like Southern accent, from Tennessee, talking about these plates, and it was
so adorable.
But I remember my mom, every time a new plate would arrive, because it would be like the next 2 months later or whatever, another plate in the series would arrive, and I remember my mom always commenting on, oh well the artist on this plate wasn't as nice as the last plate. Like she had this like rating system. She's like, the Han Solo one looked really good and the Princess Leia one looks really nice, but that doesn't look like Mark Hamill. She's like, that just doesn't look right.
Are they going for kind of a
they're just phoning these in now.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just a money grab at this point.
Right. And
Michael, I really wish we could just stop these altogether.
So your mom was being a plate hipster? Is that what you're saying?
Kinda. I mean,
Plate hipster.
But when we got the final plate, which was a big gold bordered plate for the final 10th anniversary plate, it was like a big collage plate. Luke was on it, and I was so excited because Luke was in his Empire Strikes Back outfit.
Oh yeah.
But he had this weird. Even as a kid, I knew the details, and so like his lightsaber, he was doing
yellow.
He was doing that would have been great. He was doing the pose, Tom, from that famous photograph where he's kind of crouching as he walks up the stairs with the white hallway behind him. He's got the blaster in his hand, like he's kind of crouched low with one hand behind him. But they airbrushed out the blaster for the artwork and they put a lightsaber in his hand. Well, the top half of the lightsaber coming out of the top of his hand was the Return of the Jedi lightsaber with the green blade, but the bottom part coming out of the bottom of his hand was the Empire Strikes Back hilt. And that messed with me so bad.
His hand is like a black hole.
I know, right?
A wormhole, rather.
But anyway.
For a sci-fi nerd kid, that is just infuriating.
Oh, yeah. I was like, what? What is this?
That's true. That's pretty infuriating.
It's got the Graflex top, but
it's opposite. Graflex bottom. Yeah,
I realize that.
But
how dare you?
But then after,
How dare you?
I'll just turn my mic off. Yeah?
but then after that,
eat your SpaghettiOs.
I don't know what
ma'am.
Tom's experience was, but then really after '87, things really went like dry because I didn't know in '87 that they'd started the role playing game. I wasn't aware that they started publishing.
I'm glad
those.
you brought that up though, because that's. Go ahead.
I was aware of that too. And let me just add something real quick before we change gears to some of the stuff. I got to tell you, after Return of the Jedi, kids were still pining for sci-fi movies. So, every Enemy Mine, every Ice Pirates, every Mad Max movie, every Star Trek movie that came out, you were going to watch it the first night.
Yep.
Dune, I think, came in after Return of the Jedi.
Right.
And
That was 84.
Some great ones. Last Starfighter, anything that had anything to do with sci-fi, anything to kind of regain that glory that you kind of went out with Return of the Jedi was definitely something you were not going to miss in the 80s.
True.
I haven't
really
watched a movie since I watched the last Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the last movie I'd watched, and that was actually the last movie I'd watched since. God, I'm such a crotchety old fart. That was the last movie that I'd watched since Rogue One.
Wow! So you saved yourself for a whole year.
Well, it's just I don't want to go to the theater. All those kids are so damn loud, and I can just sit here and lie in bed and watch another goddamn episode of In Search Of for the umpteenth time.
For me,
it's
it's having young kids around the house. It's every once in a while you have a buddy that you can sneak off and go watch a movie with without getting in trouble or disrupting the flow of everything. But there is a plight when the kids are young, trying to get out. And to me, what's funny is my brain changes gears. And like you said, Tom, it's just not worth it. Like the disruption to your routine, it has to be something big, like The Last Jedi or like Rogue One, to get you to even try.
I definitely agree with that. Yep.
Yeah, it's funny. Nowadays, it's just, I don't want to go to the theater, and I don't want to wait in line, and I don't want to buy popcorn for $20. And before it was the Road Warrior Mad Max. That's in theaters. Let's go and watch that 30 times.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you can when the ticket's like less than $2 standard. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, times change, and here I am with a hobo beard and thumb up my ass.
All right. Well.
So what I was going to ask, and this comes from my own experience sort of as a metal fan. So I want you guys to talk about, maybe, Tom, it's not as big a deal for you because you left Star Wars by your own admission.
I did, by my own accord.
Right. So, but just
away.
in your lives, you've been a fan of Star Wars when it was really popular in its original incarnation. And then you've also been a fan of it when it was not popular at all and very few people were thinking about it. It was not part of the zeitgeist. Mm-hmm. So what is the difference? Like, is it more fun to have it as something that you can share with your friends and everyone's talking about it and you're part of that huge crowd of people who are like, hooray for Star Wars? Or is it kind of cool to have it all on your own, like it's your own private Idaho?
You want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
First off, I'm going to say first, that I have come to the conclusion that you and Tom and a few other people I know are kind of proto-hipsters. Because you were that way before it was even cool to be called a hipster. You had already decided that you like a thing, and who cares? Everybody else can go to hell. I like this thing.
Right.
And so, I mean, I'm not using the word hipster to insult.
Right.
But it's funny because I feel like it is still our past and our generation that is defining what is considered cool this generation.
Because you're bringing that up, and I always hear the word hipster as an insult because usually when I hear it in the context of, and I'm just putting this out there for a discussion.
Whoa.
When I hear that, I think that people, because a lot of times people will levy that term at me or Michael on RetroBlasting as saying, you're just saying you don't like this to sound cool or to sound elitist or snobby or whatever. And so the reason I wanted to talk about these things, not even from the perspective of modern anything, is just to sort of lay the foundation of there's a reason why certain fans anyway, not all of them, there are people who are being snobby, but I feel like
anybody can take something too far, and that comes to define the whole thing. So
you can have something, though, that you truly loved and that you sort of gave a lot of yourself to, gave a lot of your time, your money, your own self a little bit. Like, certainly for Michael, I think that's true. Like, it's wrapped up in his identity because he was such a fan throughout his, like, from the age of 4. I mean, his entire identity was formed with Star Wars
sitting in front of that sailboat TV.
That's right. So
we're going to reenact that at some point. It'll be a video.
I'm just thinking that, it's hard for somebody to come along and say, well, you don't really, you're just saying this because. So I'm just trying to sort of show everyone and just casually walk through what it is to be a huge fan of something from the very inception, from the very beginning, and then sort of follow it through its natural progression. And we're not necessarily going to talk about the modern stuff, but I think it does show that for a lot of fans, like these things are more, they become more. This is how they become more than just a movie or just a toy or something like that. It's this shared experience of you're talking about it with your friends. Every bit of your playtime is you, like Tom, you were saying, you know, riding through the woods and, you know, reenacting those scenes, and it sort of forms a big part of your world. It's not just, oh, I went to a movie and I had popcorn and then I moved on with my life.
Yeah,
Right. Star Wars was such an experience that when I was a kid, what I remember from my childhood was Star Wars related.
Right.
Like, I remember that camping trip that we took to BC, and we went to Nanaimo, and you know, we found a Death Squad commander figure that I picked up when we were camping there. I mean, it all wraps up into, remember me? I'm the Death Squad commander. But it's everything that I remember definitively, or everything's romanticized now, of course, because I'm sure everything wasn't as exciting as I remember it. But everything that I remember, as far as even the little things like what I just said about the camping trip, it's defined by Star Wars for some reason. And I don't know why that is, but it just is.
And that's the part that is getting into your psyche and sort of changing your worldview a little bit. Not to get too deep into it, but I'm just saying that's what's interesting to me. And so when you've got that where it's defining everything that you're doing as a kid up until 85, 87, wherever that line was, and then you have, you know, a period of time where it's not around, how do you then, what do you do with that, Michael? Michael, you go.
Well, I think Aaron had a thought before.
It was just very simply that, you know, you have all this, like, I think to support you were saying when it's such a part of your fabric and it's everything you're doing, and all of a sudden you're surrounded by toys, you're surrounded by things to watch, and then one day it goes away, what do you do? Like, what do you do with yourself after it's gone?
Mm-hmm.
It was weird because for me, 88 comes along. Some of the plates are still trickling in.
But they're not quite.
God bless the plates.
I know, right? And then...
Did you ever eat off of one of these plates?
No, they were not plates to eat off of.
Okay. But you didn't get hungry
lead
one night? I mean, we're not doing to judge you.
No.
Like a Twinkie?
As a kid, I wished I could have.
All the plates are in the dishwasher. I've only got these plates. I've got no choice.
No.
But, you know, as a kid in 88, 89, you know, I was going to see, like Tom said, I was going to see all the other movies that were coming out. I was, you know, going to see Batman and Star Trek V and, you know, just trying to chase that dragon, you know. I know.
Right.
And it nothing matched it.
Nothing scratched it.
Right. At the same time, I was doing things like, my mom was an avid proponent of reading. She would take us to bookstores and we could get whatever books we wanted. And sometimes we would go to the bookmobile would come along and we'd go to that. And I remember I checked out the paperback of The Making of Return of the Jedi. And I, you know, read as much of it as I could before, you know. Or I got a novel called Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Sharu, which, you know, was at a bookstore. It was like the last copy, and it was in great shape, but it had just never sold. And my mom bought that because she believed in buying books. But I was always trying to keep connecting with Star Wars. And because I didn't know about the role-playing game at the time, and I didn't know what role-playing was, really. I was just learning about what Dungeons & Dragons was.
If you grew up like I did in the South, it had kind of a negative connotation.
It did.
There was a shadow hanging over role-playing games where everybody thought you were going to immediately paint your face with blood and go running off into a sewer somewhere.
But I didn't even know. I didn't even know to look for it. Is what I'm saying. I didn't know it existed. So then when we moved to England in '90, it was weird because Star Wars kept following me around. Like in middle school, and I was obsessed with it. But in middle school, I was known as the Star Wars kid.
Me too.
Not the one from YouTube, but like they just called me the Star Wars kid.
So you were, Tom? Even though you were on to girls and you were on to bikes?
Oh yeah, I was. Well, you know, there's a post that I posted, and this was already early '90s, '91, '92, and I still in Port Angeles where my dad lived, and I still have. You know, I had a room there because it was my old house. The Star Wars figures were still there as I had left them back in 1983, 84.
Right.
Oh, okay.
You know, all on
like
you know, a desk. So that hadn't changed for a decade at least.
Right.
So I was still definitely the Star Wars guy, because I was drawing in school, and when I should have been doing assignments, I was drawing stuff.
Yep, I was drawing Millennium Falcons in the margins.
Yeah, artwork and that kind of thing. So I was always doing something with Star Wars related stuff.
Yeah, and in England, we went to this museum called the Museum of Moving Image, which is no longer there, but it was near Waterloo Station. And it was a museum dedicated to science fiction and fantasy filmmaking and television. And it had all these great props and stuff in it. And it had it had the Daleks from Doctor Who, which I didn't know what that was at the time, but I'm glad, knowing what I know now, I'm glad I saw them. It had TikTok from Return to Oz there, a lot of the hints and stuff. And when I turned a corner, there was this big centerpiece central room that had this big projection screen on it showing famous clips from different sci-fi movies and television, like Forbidden Planet and stuff. But flanking it were 2 stormtrooper costumes from Return of the Jedi, because Return of the Jedi, like the other Star Wars movies, had been filmed in England. And so I was like, holy cow, I'd never seen a real piece of the movie before. Like I'd never, as a little kid from Nashville, I'd never seen an actual piece from the movie. Nor had I ever seen, in 1990-91, had I ever seen anybody in a screen accurate costume they made themselves. Like I'd never seen anything like that. Didn't even know people could do that. You know, it was so beyond my 11-year-old brain or 12-year-old brain.
Oh, in my mind, that stuff was actually made out of space-age composites.
Yeah, yeah.
I had no idea it was plastic and everything else.
Right. So it just blew my mind. And so in the gift shop, they had, they had a great gift shop, and they had this big poster rack. And these were like 27 by 40 movie posters, and they had Return of the Jedi in there. Now, this is 7 years later, and I'm like, holy cow. And so, I got a rolled Return of the Jedi, which is the one that's hanging in our studio right now, framed. And if you look closely within the frame, you can see the Scotch tape in places where I had, kept it together, during my...
Did you ever eat off the poster?
No.
Twinkies?
But at that point, I started buying the toys off of other kids, like who still had them. And my enthusiasm was kind of infectious on a limited level. Like other kids would get back into the movies because of my enthusiasm for it. And so one day we went down to Kingston. And in Kingston, there was back then, I don't know if it's the same way now, but there's a high street in every English town, so that's where all the shops are. And they had a Virgin Megastore that was right there at the end of the street. And we went in, and it was like that was when Star Wars came back and hit me in the face in like a big way. Like I was already, like I said, still into it, but there was nothing to be into, right?
Right.
So I go into this Virgin Megastore, and the first thing I'm greeted by are these computer monitors, because this was the part of the Megastore that sold all the PC games and all of what I found out were the role-playing books. Like England was big on Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing and all that stuff, and they had an entire wing of this store devoted to all that gaming. So I came into the store, and behind the guy at the register were like multiple computer monitors that had all been put on splitters, and they were all playing the brand new PC game X-Wing. And and I was watching the cutscenes from the beginning of the game with Admiral Akbar and the X-Wings flying out of the Rebel cruisers and stuff. And at that time, you have to understand that those graphics looked photorealistic to our eye at that time,
right?
Because we had never seen anything better. Mm-hmm. And then I wandered over and found the role-playing books, the original edition, first edition. The second edition hadn't even come out yet.
So did your head just explode?
Oh, it blew up, and I walked away with the rule book and the source book. And inside the rule book and the source book, I know I'm dominating for the conversation, but inside both of them was all this extra information about Star Wars that had never been revealed before. And it was stuff that Lucas would eventually adopt and give to Timothy Zahn when he started writing the novels, which was only... 18 months after I found these books? Lucas liked that information so much. So it was this immersive kind of, oh my gosh, like all these photos from the movies I've never seen before, and all this info on the Falcon. And I'll never forget that, Luke Skywalker's X-Wing isn't just an X-Wing fighter. It's an Incom T-65C-A2 X-Wing fighter. You know, like it's that kind of stuff. And
so that means there was like a whole industry, like we have Honda and everything else, that was making spaceships. And they don't really touch on that in the movies, but when you read these books, you're like, oh, that was an Incom.
Right. It was
Well, because
Incom.
that's the whole joy of role-playing games is it's such a deep universe. You can really just take it as far as you want to go.
Right.
I would have been interested in finding out what all those little things on R2 did. Like, did they have breakouts of all that?
I think they did.
They did, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Tom would know since he's got one.
He's got an actual R2.
But that was kind of the thing that kept you, like, you see those, no, Tom can't see them, but those 3 games right there in the boxes, those were all bought at Virgin
Tell us what they are.
Star Warriors,
Black box with yellow writing and green background.
Escape from the Death Star, and Battle for Endor. Those are all boxed set games that were related to the role-playing game, and I bought all of those at the Virgin Megastore in Guilford. But that was the kind of stuff, the fuel that kept you going, at least for me, during the dark times. I mean, because there was nothing to watch that was new. There was nothing to buy.
Yeah.
I would
And
raid.
the books weren't flourishing yet.
No, the books hadn't
you
even
said there
come
was
out yet.
Lando,
'Cause that
and
was in the 90s.
That Lando book had been sitting around when I found it in a bookstore in the late 80s. It had been sitting around for about 6 years.
Okay.
Yeah, so
And so then the Zahn books came out in the 90s, though. Right? Like
Tom, when was that? 92?
92, 93, somewhere in there.
I think you're about right.
Yeah.
I never got much into the books,
Okay.
but that sounded about right. 92 is when they started appearing.
Right, because I turned the corner in 92. We were headed to Normandy, and we had to go to was it Portsmouth? I think we were in Portsmouth or something. And that was where they had this bookstore at the port, and Mom said, get a book, before we go. And I turned the corner, and there was this big stand up there that said, the saga continues, and it's Heir to the Empire.
Oh!
I was like, oh my gosh, it's episode 7, and I grabbed the book, and I read it on the boat overnight.
And you were like, yeah, World War II. Yeah.
I remember it was just the most surreal experience because it was an overnight boat trip, ferry ride across the channel. And I'm sitting there in what is still to this day the warmest duvet I've ever slept under in this bunk.
I got to know, did you ever eat off the duvet?
And I'm sitting there reading. And here's the other thing. Okay, so I know everyone's like, when am I going to get to talk? So I'll shut up in a second. But
No, everyone wants you to keep talking.
No one's thinking that.
So
Yeah, no one is thinking that, Michael.
Okay.
Please.
So this is the geekiest. I've done a lot of geeky things. So let's be clear on that.
Get ready, everybody.
But this is one of the geekiest things I ever did. So I was so obsessed still with the Star Wars movies in the dark times that I turned the movies on in my room on VHS and then put a tape recorder up next to the television and then quietly left the room and let the tapes record the audio from the movies so that I could just listen to them on my bus ride to school.
I super did the same thing.
Yeah. And
Did it.
Yeah.
I
Did
did
it.
it too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then I went out and I got the soundtracks on cassette, the Polydor, I think it was Polydor soundtracks. And so I had those. So I always had those with my Walkman. And so when we were headed over to Normandy, I had my Walkman with me. So when I had that book, I didn't expect to run into that book. I sat there that night and I turned the first page, with my bunk light on the ferry, and I had my headphones on, and the first page is the Star Wars logo, and then it has like a little synopsis. I turned on the main theme, and I read it in time with
nice.
with
That is
the
awesome.
theme,
Nice.
and then I just let the soundtrack play while I read.
So
the
on
book.
the audiobook copies that you recently discovered where they have done the full dramatization, well, it's not a full dramatization, they're still just a narrator, but
Right.
if you haven't listened to any Star Wars books, early on they started doing this thing where they got actual accurate audio from the movies, including the Foley work for the fighters and everything, and they actually time it all out and play it all throughout the book. So
Right.
when Zahn is sitting in his room and he's talking to somebody, you hear the low rumble of the ship, and then the theme of the dark side theme is kind
Right.
of playing low in the background. So when you found that audiobook and started listening to it, did it take you right back to that ferry?
It kind of did, yeah. It was like, wow, this is pretty surreal. Like, this is surreal. And when you don't have anything else to expect, like you don't expect another movie to ever come out, you are excited about that book, assuming it doesn't suck. And thankfully, those books didn't suck.
Right.
So,
And I'll be the first to admit, the Star Wars books that we all miss, these days after they've been kind of relegated a little bit to the side, They had their ups and downs.
Right.
There were good ones. Timothy Zahn was a lot of fun, but then there were some that, they got who they could to write it. But even then, we were just thankful to have more.
Sure. But a lot of I used to buy them day and date, and a lot of them were stinkers. But some of them, for every 5 stinkers, you got like 2 great ones, and you lived for those. You lived for those.
That's not great stats, but
It
sounds like the movies
I
today.
was about to say that. Thank you for saying it for me, Tom. So my question is, and I'm going to take it back to the anthropology question, is if you're at that age in 92, you were 14.
Mm-hmm.
So you're that into Star Wars in the early 90s when it's when it's not cool, no one's thinking about it. And you're also getting to that age where it's not cool anymore too. And so I guess my question is, what are your classmates and your friends' reactions? Are they very accepting of the fact that, well, that's just Michael, he's just into Star Wars and that's cool? Or is it like, Michael's such a geek, he's like Napoleon Dynamite, he's like walking around with his Walkman listening to the movie on a cassette tape?
Well, I didn't do that at school. I just had it for the bus ride. But my friends, I was never good with the ladies.
I beg to differ.
But like my friends, my guy friends, they just knew that was who I was. And I wasn't like.
So they didn't make fun of you. It wasn't like the jocks were beating you up in school.
I mean, there were people that would make fun of me occasionally, but I don't. It must have been mild because I don't hold it like a scar. I don't remember specific incidents.
Right.
I remember more specific incidents from college, like after college than that, and I'm not going to get into all that, but it doesn't scar me. But what I'm saying is the stuff in college was almost more cutting than anything I would have. Middle school was fine. It was fine.
And Tom, I'm guessing you would just punch him in the face and then ride off on your BMX bike.
I'd give him a tail whip to the head.
There you go.
But I all of my friends were Star Wars guys too, so I knew a lot of these guys since I moved to Port Angeles. So back in '82. So I mean, we'd see something Star Wars and we'd go, "Hey, I love that stuff," and we'd play with the figures. We'd still play with the figures and stuff when we were.
I had friends
getting older, so it's definitely who you knew, and then of course as Michael said, when you go off to school or a different school, then it's a completely different scenario.
Michael had to move a lot,
as far as being ridiculed and stuff, I didn't get any of that. And even when I went to college and stuff, people knew exactly that I was a Star Wars fan, but they thought it was kind of cool. So never had a problem like that.
Yeah, it was weird because, my friends were real accepting of all that kind of stuff because even though they themselves had completely abandoned it, because that's how you kind of knew that with confidence that you were the one carrying the torch in the dark times because you were the only one with a torch in the cave, and everybody else,
You're Rambo.
Yeah, everybody else kind of flocked to it. They kind of. Case in point, I had a science project I had to do for class, and I decided to do my science project on special effects, which that was pre-digital. So I was, talking about I made a shadow box that was going to show it was simulating blue screen compositing. And so it was all manual, but what I did was I put my toy X-Wing and suspended it in the center of this rectangular box with a blue panel on the back.
Schrodinger's X-Wing.
And then I created a backdrop that I could slide in front of it, behind it, that was the trench run.
Uh-huh.
When I brought that box into class that day ahead of my presentation, all the guys in class just flipped out because they were like, the odd thing was, it wasn't because it was special effects. It was because all of them to a person said, "Oh my gosh, I haven't seen one of those in so long." And it was my X-Wing from when I was a kid. They had all given them away already. They had all sold them in garage sales, thrown them away, all this kind of stuff. And I still had mine, and it had all of its guns and all the canopies, parts, and everything. And that was what kind of made you oddly special, like in the dark times, if you were really holding that torch.
I was the one.
I asked. I got obsessed because of the great photos in the role playing book. I got obsessed with finally figuring out what Luke's lightsaber hilt was made from. The original Star Wars Empire Strikes Back lightsaber hilt.
Did they break it down, or did you figure that out by just examining very closely?
I had to examine. They never broke it down.
So how did you know what a Graflex flash was?
I didn't know it was a Graflex.
So it was still just Greek. I mean, it was... You just had to wait till you saw one of those flashes somewhere and went, that's the piece.
Right, which I didn't know that till I got back to the States. But I was the kid that walked up to my science teacher and said... hey, do you have any Bunsen burners that don't work anymore? And he was like, and I said, I really need the nozzle off one. And he was like, why? I said, because I'm pretty sure that the emitter of inside the lightsaber hilt, I was pretty sure it looked similar to a Bunsen burner nozzle because I didn't have any reference photo. That was the level I was at. Yeah. And, so I'll shut up. But that was like...
But am I correct in my recollection that even in like high school, you had your like X-Wing or... whatever hanging in your room, like from the ceiling? Is that true?
Oh, yeah. I need to get the photos. I've been meaning to post those photos, Tom, on I Grew Up Star Wars. I got to get them from my parents. I got to get them from my parents first, but I have photos of my room from high school. And
please do.
Yeah, and it's all vintage and some early 90s Star Wars comic books on the walls, like in rails, like a rail system, and then all the vintage toys that I'd kept with the ones I was still acquiring on display. Like this, Tom, this is pre-Power of the Force 2. Like this is, I had enough stuff that I didn't need Power of the Force 2 crud.
And to scratch an itch, the Zon book started in, I think, 1991 to just give us a reference point.
Yeah, so that means that in the UK, they probably were printed a few months after that. So that would make sense.
Yeah, so I didn't go into a lot of boys' rooms as a younger kid. But the ones that I did, like especially around the age of, say, 12, 13, 14, where you're talking about, they would have toys, some of them, but they would be like, they had already been sort of moved over into a corner somewhere. And, oh, no, that's they would, like, talk it down. So if you said anything about their toys, they were like, oh, no, I've got my cool Lamborghini poster and my video games or whatever they were trying.
The rock cleaning kit.
Right.
Remember, remember the gyms and everything?
Yeah. Whatever cool things that were more grown-up type things as opposed to action figures and toys and God forbid, stuffed animals in a boy's room. And, the reality is we all had all that stuff. But it's just interesting that you didn't see the need to like, oh, I'm going to hide my shame. I'm going to like put it all away. And I know that's my point.
I never saw it as shameful. Like I actually saw it as everything in this room is legitimately cooler than anything those other kids have in their room.
And you still feel that.
I still feel that way.
And I agree with you, but I'm just saying, it's true.
My friend Kara, who passed away a few years ago, she was a huge Pearl Jam fan. Mm-hmm. And the reason I bring this up is because when she found out that I was the Star Wars fan in high school, we're back in the States by this point, she said, well, no one's a bigger fan of anything than I am of Pearl Jam. And I said...
You were like, oh, yeah.
I said, okay. And she said, and when you come over for she was holding like a party at her house with everybody coming over. And she was like, when you come over, I'll show you. And I was like, all right. So I went over to her house and she said, everybody come up, I'm going to show you my Pearl Jam collection. And we're like, okay. So we go up there and it's literally just like a shelf of CDs, like about 2 feet long. Like it's and I'm sitting there and she's like, look at it. And I was just kind of silently, I was like, she goes, so what do you think? And I'm like,
I think you need to come over to my house.
I was like, I don't think you know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Everybody in the car.
And
challenge accepted.
And so a month later or so, they all came over to my house and Kara's like, all right. She's like, what do you got? And I was like, well, you just go upstairs. She went upstairs. She was up there for about, 5 or 10 seconds. And then she came back down. She was like, I don't even know what, I don't know. Like, I gotta go. Like
she's out skipping rocks on the lake, just trying to figure out life.
So I never saw it as humiliating. I just rolled with it. I liked that stuff. It's like why should I change who I am? It's everybody else who sucks.
Like Michael Bolton in Office Space. Why should I change? He's the one that sucks.
You're like the Iron Sheik, Michael. You come to my house, you get humbled.
So yeah.
All right, so moving into the 90s, you've got the role-playing game, you've got the Timothy Zahn books and some other extended universe books. You have the video games that you mentioned.
Dark Forces. Tom, am I right? Dark Forces?
Oh, yeah. I was just looking at – it's funny that you mentioned that before we started the podcast today. I was watching some old videos, YouTube videos, playthroughs of Dark Forces.
I think all that stuff was on sale on Steam not long ago.
Great
so I
game.
picked up the Dark Forces and the Jedi Knight games, which, by the way, don't look like we remember them.
No, they don't. But they were so much fun to play at the time on proper resolution monitors with the right equipment. I mean, and plus, I don't know, Tom, if you've ever thought about this, but the thing I loved about the original Dark Forces is you can tell it was made during the time when there were no prequels. They literally saw Star Wars as a laser gun combat game. Like it was not lightsabers everywhere all the time.
Yeah, it was like it was Lucasfilm's answer to Doom.
Yes. And it was It was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the only difference was what they improved upon, Dark Forces improved upon, was that you could look up and look down.
Yep.
And there were different levels of elevations that you could get to in the game. But yeah, it was awesome. And of course, the first mission to Dark Forces was stealing the Death Star plans.
Yep.
Right. So that was awesome.
Yeah. What you were basically a one-man Rogue One is what you were.
Yeah, pretty much. Exactly.
Known as One Rogue One.
Right.
And I guess the only other thing I can think of, and you guys obviously would know better than me, but like you mentioned before, Power of the Force came out in the 90s. What,
95.
Oh, 95.
95.
And then 2 years later, you had the special editions, however you ended up feeling about those. So I guess a question I would have for you guys is when the special editions hit, and I'm sure, like me, you went to see them in the theater, like opening night, and it was like a big deal. Was that like when everybody started talking about Star Wars? Like, did you feel like it was coming back? Like, I don't know if you were reading magazines and hearing that Lucas was starting to work on, the prequels, or
we found out it was cool. I had a summer film program at Northwestern University between my junior and senior year. It was 5 weeks. And as part of that program in the summer of 96, they took us to the Chicago Science Museum or Aerospace Museum. I can't remember what the museum's called, but it has the big IMAX theater in it. And they were taking us to this movie that I didn't know anything about called Special Effects.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we go into this theater, and it's a true IMAX screen that like half a hemisphere, like it wraps around, the whole thing. And I was taken aback because the movie has an entire section in it where not only they recreate with models the original opening shot of Star Wars for IMAX, which
with
was
the Star Destroyer and the blockade runner.
It was killer.
Wow.
But they also
it was amazing.
Oh, it was unreal, right? And then Tom, when you were seeing that for the first time, were you thrown off by those first shots of those dune buggies going through the desert? And you're like, what am I about to watch here? And then all of a sudden, like, because you're looking at the guys, all you can see, it's almost like the precursor to a GoPro. And it's from the POV of just behind the driver and the passenger of this dune buggy in the desert. But you look at their legs, and you're like, why are their legs wrapped in white plastic? What is going on? And then you see them in another shot suddenly get out, and you hear the narrator, and they're guys that are in like 50% of their stormtrooper outfits, just enough to be able to sit down in the dune buggy, and they're like, you hear the narrator voiceover, and he's like, Lucasfilm's second unit is out here today shooting new scenes for Star Wars, the special edition. And then they show like the dewbacks redone and stuff as they and I was like, oh my God. Like I sat up. Everybody else in the film program who was from all over the country, they all kind of looked at me because they already knew I was the Star Wars guy. And they were like, this must be the biggest treat for him.
Let's watch Michael have a stroke.
Yeah, but I was also reading, and I'm sure Tom...
So you created reaction videos?
so Tom, were you reading Star Wars Insider at the time?
Oh, yeah. I was poring over anything I could find.
Yeah, that was the fanzine.
Okay. That's what I was figuring. There was a fanzine.
That was the Lucasfilm official kind of after Bantha Tracks Star Wars Insider magazine. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we were getting these little bits of information.
Now, was that in 97 or even before?
This was 96.
That was 95.
Oh, yeah, 95,
Okay.
96.
Wow,
yeah.
okay.
96, I think, maybe.
Because in 96, that summer, my mom sent me a care package to Northwestern, and in it was my latest issue of Star Wars Insider, and there were two big surprises in it. One was that Han Solo and the redone Jabba the Hutt were on the cover from the deleted scene. And we were like, what? Because I already knew about the deleted scene from the documentary From Star Wars to Jedi, which I had on video cassette back when I was a kid in the 80s and still have. The other big surprise was that when I turned the page, there was this company called Icons that was making exact replicas of Luke Skywalker's lightsaber hilt. So it was like a twofer. I was like, ah!
So it sounds like the dark times were actually pretty cool for you. I mean, from what you're telling me, I
think Tom would agree with me that the only thing about the dark times that I would not want to repeat are the Bendhams.
That just sounds awful.
Yeah, not a big fan of the Bendhams. I mean, I did appreciate that there was stuff out there. What else was there? These Hollywood, not Hollywood Video, but it was the
Suncoast.
mall store
Like
that had
Suncoast
you could get
Video?
Suncoast,
Yeah.
right? What were those vinyl figures? The applause figures.
Yep, applause. And I always wanted
those were equally as awful.
They were. I did like the original one though, the Luke X-wing, but I never got to have them because I didn't have my own expendable income. So I spent all my points on getting the definitive collection Laserdisc set without having a Laserdisc player.
I would just go there and get them to open up CDs and go listen to them in the back. That was the coolest thing back then.
Yeah.
There was no way to download stuff at that point in time.
Right.
I mean, that was how you figured stuff out.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, like, we had the micro machines, Tom, which were pretty nice originally, like before they went totally overboard. I thought they were pretty nice. What else? We had Action Masters, which were die-cast miniatures that were about 2 to 3 inches tall, I guess 2 inches tall, and they had interlocking bases. They were okay.
The micro machines were great. Do you remember the chrome editions or the silver edition sets that you could get and stuff? Yeah, those were funny.
That was when the 90s started to have that collectability vomit over everything, because it wasn't just foil covered comic book cover variants. It was now you can get the entire Micro Machine Empire Strikes Back set just spray painted all silver. And it's
right.
like
that was lazy, but it was like, okay, I guess I'll buy this.
Yeah, it's like
never going to see any of this stuff again, so I might as well take care of it.
So. Right. What's that?
Your favorite comics would fracture into 4 timelines, leading you to have to purchase 4 comic books every time they came out.
And
I'm thinking of Superman in this case.
Well, no, but Dark Horse Comics was producing all these comic books: Tales of the Jedi, Jabba the Hutt, droids. They resurrected the droids idea for a whole series. They were reprinting the old comics from like the newspaper strips in the 70s and 80s, which was cool.
What do you think was spurring that on? Just trying, was the license sort of being given out to all these sort of smaller companies and they were just trying to make a buck off of Star Wars, or was it the lead up to something bigger?
It was the lead up. Okay. It was definitely the lead up.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
it had to have been, because it was gone and now things were starting to trickle.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit more of a trickle, and then you had a nice little river going before 1997, and then there it was, and then it never left again.
Yeah, I read an article recently last year. It was pretty cool, and it did an extensive interview with the guys at West End Games that licensed and created the role-playing game, and they went back and talked about how they got the license from Lucasfilm, and they said that Lucasfilm was really surprised when they approached them in '86. For the license, because it was a dead property at that point, and Lucas had made it very clear he wasn't going to be doing any new movies at that point. And they were like, well, we'd really like to do a role-playing game on this. And he's like, okay. And West End Games ended up paying the most they'd ever paid for any license to do that game. But when they did, it took off because it was so popular amongst... And again, when I say took off, role-playing games were very niche. They were always for nerds in the late 80s, early 90s. But amongst that set... they were extremely popular and they were bestsellers. Yeah. And then whether or not that was what prompted Lucas to get somebody to write books or not, I don't know. I don't know if that's related. But what I do know is that Lucas did hand Timothy Zahn a stack of those source books to draw from to create the world building for the Timothy Zahn trilogy, the Thrawn trilogy. And those were New York Times bestsellers. So those prompted a lot of interest. It at least said to, was it Del Rey or Bantam? It might have been Bantam. It was Bantam. At least said to Bantam, we should get more writers and license more books.
Well, Star Wars has a way of just doing that in general. Like it did when the original film became so successful. It was like, hey, these types of movies can make a lot of bank.
Right.
Because up until that point, they were risky.
Right.
Same thing with the toys. Toys were a big risky venture until Star Wars. And then it was like, hey, there's a lot of bank in this. And it's interesting because after Kenner was absorbed back by Hasbro and the license got lost for Star Wars, and then they got into that big bidding war to get the license back again, didn't they also pay one of the biggest prices anyone had ever paid to get the license back, although they totally fumbled the play once they got it?
Right. Yeah. It's funny because you look at the Power of the Force line and you look at how it developed, and I just feel like it was a risk even then because you're talking about them bringing out Tom, keep me honest here. Is that the first time that you can remember a toy company selling toys for movies that were already nearly 20 years old? And I know that they came out with a concurrent video cassette release, the original One Last Time release in 95. Was that, Tom, do you think that was all tied together? Or because it was so adult targeted at that point, I feel like.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure. I know, like, Planet of the Apes? No, Planet of the Apes didn't. There was nothing after the movies or the show came out. Star Trek, maybe?
Yeah, but Star Trek was still continuing to put stuff out.
Yeah, true, because you had the Next Generation.
The movies, and then you had Next Gen sort of keeping that spark alive. And I
would say that this probably was,
and they were
pretty unprecedented
once
again, Star Wars just pretty much died and then resurrected itself into a juggernaut again.
Yeah,
so
it was like the Lazarus Man. It just and he's alive again, and and he's like the headless body of Agnew. He's just like, and he's just destroying everything in his path. It was nice to answer your question. It was cool when the special edition came out and it was number 1 in the theater. That was a big bragging right. I do remember going to my friends at school the next Monday, and I remember having conversations with them where I'm just because for 4 years that was my senior year. So for 4 years at that point, they'd known me as the Star Wars guy. And I was like, I joked around with them. There was a friend of ours who really liked Top Gun, and I was like,
those are comparable films.
But I was just saying,
was he your wingman anytime?
The thing is that we used to have conversations because prior to the special edition coming out, Star Wars just was Michael's favorite movie, and then Jack's favorite movie was Top Gun or whatever, and then the next person's favorite movie was Star Trek 2 or whatever. And so we just all had our favorite movies, right? I got to go in and say, hey, guys, guess what? My favorite movie got released 20 years after its original release in theaters again. And guess what? It's number 1 again.
Yeah.
Suck it. I was, that ain't going to happen with your movies. Your movies are never going to be that cool.
Right.
It's true.
It is true.
Yeah.
So when you saw, and we can start wrapping up because I know we've been talking for a while, but when you saw the special editions in the theater, what was your reaction? Like you're coming out of the dark times, it's been so long, and I mean it's not like it's a new movie, but it's sort of a new movie. It's new, especially if you've watched the old ones so many times. It's different. So I mean, was it good? Was it bad? Was it just different? What was it like for you, Tom?
I'm a big fan of cheese sticks. Right. So
I see where you're going with that.
If I go to a restaurant, and I haven't been to this restaurant in years, and I love their cheese sticks, and I'm driving down the road and I see that restaurant again, and I go, that's right. That's the place that has the cheese sticks. But I'm on my way to New Jersey, and there's probably no way I'm ever going to get back here. I've got to go in there and I've got to eat as many damn cheese sticks as I can fit in my maw. I'm going to sit there and eat 16,000 orders of cheese sticks because I don't know when I'm going to be able to get back here. So I'm going to have my fill.
And those things don't keep well.
That's what it was like when the special editions came out.
So you're saying you saw them over and over again?
I went in the first night. I woke up the next morning and I watched it, and then I watched it again, and then I watched it again. I watched those things over and over. I hated the Jabba scene, but I was willing to forgive that. The Greedo shoots first. I was willing to forgive that because it was Star Wars back on the big screen, and I had to get my fill because I didn't know if we would be getting back there or not.
Right.
Yeah.
So even if they changed the batter a little bit, even if the cheese was slightly different, the
marinara sauce wasn't as kicky as before, but it's still the cheese sticks that I remember. So I'm gonna feed on them.
Good for you.
Until I can't feed on them anymore.
Some say he's still eating cheese sticks.
So
I love those things, but the old man's taking blood pressure medicine these days, so he's got to come off the cheese sticks a little bit.
You knew that the prequels were coming out if you're reading Star Wars Insider. Mm-hmm. So the question is, you're seeing the special edition, and
go ahead, Michael. Did we really know definitively? Those were feelers, I guess, but did we know for a fact that the prequels were coming out I guess we did, because that was kind of priming us for the prequels to get released 2 years later.
I don't remember seeing photography for it until it
was just kind of mentioned, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was kind of mentioned that they're working on something.
But you didn't really know what it was actually going to turn out to be.
Had no idea.
Sure, because back in those days, it wasn't like now where there's internet leaks and whatever.
Right.
So Michael, what about you? When you saw it, was it cheese sticks or what?
I was not.
It's got to be cheese sticks for you, Michael. Come on.
It was.
Come on, buddy.
It was cheese sticks. I saw each special edition in the theater 5 times.
Okay.
I didn't walk out angry like I did with the first movie I walked out angry of in the Star Wars saga from the theater was Attack of the Clones. Phantom Menace was so weird and the 16 years without a Star Wars movie that I couldn't walk out initially hating it because I wasn't sure what I'd just seen. I was like, I got to be wrong. I just didn't. Mm-hmm. But see, now I've learned through wisdom that you really should trust your first instinct on the SAT and not change your answer. So, but for the special edition, it was exciting to be in the theater. But because I knew the movie so intimately, and see, the thing is that the trailer. Okay, so let me back up. In the winter of '96, my friends and I went to see Star Trek: First Contact, and the trailer for the special edition was going to play in front of it, but First Contact was playing on 2 screens, and we got sent to the screen that didn't have that trailer. So I was pissed. So then I was like, you guys, I'll be back in a minute. There were no cell phones then. I was like, I'll be back in a minute. So I ran over to the other theater and saw the trailer. And then I ran back to the movie of my theater, which was barely populated for some reason. And I said, they saw the euphoria on my face because the trailer was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. It started with a little television screen, had this awesome narrator who we remember from the ABC Saturday Night Movie. People have experienced Star Wars the only way possible on the big screen, on the little screen. But if you haven't seen it this way, you've never seen it at all. And then this huge X-Wing goes flying out of the television and just blows up the movie theater.
Right.
So I'm sitting there, and they're like, what? Michael, what? I said, I just saw the Star Wars Special Edition trailer. I don't even want to see this movie now. I don't even care. And they were like, oh, come on. And so we saw the movie, and it was fine. And then we get back up, and we know that the movie's about to start again in the other screen. So I'm like, you got to get over here quick. They're like, but we didn't pay tickets. I said, we're just watching the trailer, and then we're going to leave. We're not staying for the movie, whatever. And we ran in there.
They don't care.
They didn't care because all the theater attendants, we're like, we just want to see the trailer, and we're gone. They're like, oh, cool, man. So we see it again, and then we walk out, and they're like, yeah, I guess if I'd seen that first, I wouldn't have cared about First Contact either. And I'm like, yeah, no kidding. So then I see the movie, and the trailer didn't give you everything, obviously. It didn't tell you that the Jabba scene was going to be stupid. It didn't show you the Greedo thing.
And by the way, the Jabba scene is going to be stupid.
Right. But
and Han shot second.
But what they did show you was, hey, we are going to touch up some of those X-Wing shots that were a little slow. We're going to recreate them. And I was all for that. I was like, oh, sweet. It's going to be,
LucasArts was doing its magic at that point. They were
Right.
taking all this stuff that they had to do the hard way in the dust in the 70s and the beer and the LSD, and then they were taking the computers and all the lessons learned from the past and just making it right, doing it again.
Yeah.
So it was better than any touch-up in our minds. It was better than reconditioned film and all that stuff they always bragged about for the
Right.
specially remastered. We were like, no, they're remaking some of this stuff.
Right, and that was it's funny you bring up the remaster because that's what I was going to mention next was, I knew the film so well from watching the VHS in 95, the laser discs in widescreen THX. Like I finally got a Laserdisc player before that. And Tom, I don't know if you noticed this, but I felt like, especially during Luke's scene with Obi-Wan in his house, Luke looked totally sunburned. Like he looked totally just redded out. Like he was it looked like he'd been in a tanning bed, and everybody looked, it wasn't even like nice oversaturation. It was like something is off about the color in the movie. And it kept nagging at me, especially on the fifth viewing. So
I don't remember that, but now that you mention it, yeah, there was a little bit off with some of the coloring in the movie.
Well, by the time you get to Empire, it's real bad.
Yeah. It's like, what? So it's the Empire, all of Hoth is very blue in the special edition. It's not white.
Why do you think that Lucasfilm got that wrong? I mean, they're Lucasfilm. They should be able to get the color right.
There's a lot of
blue is cold.
There's a lot of fan theories.
And red is hot.
Really?
Thank you, Tom.
We're back to like preschool
I think
then
we
on
solved
that.
it. Yeah, case closed.
There's a lot of fan chatter about that. Like, he was trying to massage the movies to make them look more like how he knew the prequels were going to look, and is there cinematography? And I'm like, I don't know. I think it was a combination of the chemical baths that they restored the negatives in, plus the digital work they had to do to it to bring it up to snuff. Because even after that, every home video release, they've tried to fix it yet again.
But how much do you really believe that?
I know,
because
right.
I mean look what we've got. We've got the special editions, and they were selling the fact that they only had one rough cut that they had cleaned from that they found in a toilet somewhere. And then you've got the Harmy edition, which is basically taking elements from all of these different places, and it is so seamless and is so beautiful.
Yep.
And then you've got Adiwan's cut, which is so seamless and so beautiful, and everything's been corrected. I mean, and these are just two guys sitting in their office working on this stuff in their free time.
Yep.
I think it's just a bunch of horse that that Lucasfilm was selling us that, we put in so much effort. Well, maybe you put in so much effort, but maybe you just didn't find the right guys that could actually pull this together for you.
Right.
Yeah, they even talked about on the original DVD release, Tom, do you remember this, how the original DVD for Star Wars, the rear channels were flipped.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah. Well,
the rear audio channels were backwards. So if an X-Wing flew left to right,
it's one thing to do that on a live stream, but it's a whole other thing to do.
Live stream ain't got no QA process.
That's right.
That should have been caught by somebody.
And they say
it's almost like Lucasfilm was kind of just messing with us. It's like, we kind of got it for you. Here you go. Enjoy.
Yeah.
It feels like
you're going to buy it anyway, dummies. So.
I feel like Lucas was testing his ability to do special effects with green screen backgrounds and stuff, and in terms of the actual restoration part, he was phoning it in because his real focus, this is just my personal opinion, his real focus was on the next movie, and his pioneering thing, which didn't end up working out so well, but his thing of, I want to see if I can do a totally digital movie with no real sets.
Right.
Which is a cool idea. It just didn't end up working out super great. But, I mean, I guess I'm the only person in the room or on the podcast that I went to see the special edition the first night at the midnight showing, and I was mad. Like, I remember just getting to the scene that you just talked about a while back with the dewbacks in the desert, and, as they're coming into towards the cantina and that whole thing, and I'm just like,
I think I said something out loud. I mean, I wasn't angry.
Yeah, I don't know.
I only saw the first one in the theater, and then I was I realized what this was, and I just didn't feel the drive to go see the second.
I felt like I was being manipulated, and I felt angry. Like I felt all of that was superfluous and unnecessary, and it was distracting to me to try to watch some of the scenes that I always really loved. They were no longer clean and crisp. You had weird dinosaur things walking in front of the screen while characters are talking. Like, people are talking.
Right.
Like, Obi-Wan is talking to Luke in that scene while they're in the speeder. Mm-hmm. And one of those things walks right in front of this, like, photo bomb.
Right.
And I'm like, what is that? Like, anyway, not that
put that big stupid looking dinosaur in there. Jerky fanboys are going to want 6 of those. So we're going to be whipping up toys for those things. So stay tuned. There it is, walking by. Right. You're going to get those at Walmart here pretty soon. So keep an eye out for those.
It was the special edition, actually. I don't know if this is the way it was for you, Tom, but it was the special edition that gave me a clean break from trying to collect all the new Power of the Force toys. Like, at that point, I just started cherry picking because I didn't want that stupid thing that the Jawas fell off of in Mos Eisley. I was like, I don't want that, so I didn't buy it.
Yeah, I didn't get the bigger, but the figures. As far as the figures go, I think I stopped in 2002, 2003.
Wow, that's impressive.
Man, yeah, 2003 or something like that.
I didn't get that far. In '98, I was
really.
Yeah, in '98 it was like, I'll get Bespin Luke, and I guess that's
you
it.
still get Bespin Luke.
Yeah, that's true.
Of course, when I was collecting, it was one to keep on card and one to keep loose.
I did
and
that.
One just for the hell of it.
I did that too.
Yeah.
Up through '97, I did that. Yeah.
These are going to be worth a fortune someday.
If that many people are buying them with that in their minds, then they're definitely not ever going to be worth anything. Right. So just to wrap everything up,
everybody had that idea. Unfortunately, everybody was getting 2 or 3 of everything, and now you can buy them for pennies on the dollar. You can buy them for pennies on the penny.
Yeah,
that's the '90s for you.
Yeah.
Well, so to wrap everything up, I just thought I would sort of talk about really quickly. Now that Star Wars is huge again, and you've been a fan for 40 years, or I guess it's 40 years, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
40 years, 41 years. My gosh.
Do you feel old? So you've been a fan for however long that makes you have been a fan. What is it like now that it's again permeated? Like, just not in the terms of do you like the new movie or not, but it's more, what is it like to be a Star Wars fan that's been a classic dyed-in-the-wool Star Wars fan for all these years, now that there's so many people? Like, it's almost like, I guess I'm wondering, did you have the feeling of you wanted there to be more Star Wars talk and more Star Wars stuff and more Star Wars fans and other people being interested in it all those dark years, and then you got it and you were like, it's like a Twilight Zone episode where you're like, oh, this isn't how I thought this was going to go?
Well, if I could answer that first, it goes back to something you were saying, Aaron, earlier about the whole proto-hipster thing. You got to keep something in mind. Star Wars was not something that started out niche.
Right.
Star Wars started out universal. Everybody loved it. It was a mainstream, most successful movie ever made thing.
Yeah, it wasn't a geek thing.
It wasn't a geek thing. It was everybody loved it. Men, women, kids, adults. I mean, everybody loved it. Fish, yes.
Yep. Cats, dogs, everyone.
Cheese sticks.
Right. And then
dinosaurs.
Then it dropped off. Right? And now it's back. And it's been back since Tom said 1997. It's just never stopped since then, really. But here's the thing. Coming to your comment about, the proto-hipster versus the modern hipster and everything like that, a lot of people who are in the space now, or in this fandom, even some tracking all the way back to when Tom and I were kids, they have the attitude that if you're not liking the new material that's coming out, you're not liking it because it's popular not to like something popular, or it's cool.
Or you're just hating it because it's popular.
Right.
Yes.
And my answer to them is always, why are we not free to have differing opinions on different things within this franchise? Like I like this part of it, I don't like this. And the reason I negate their argument is because when they say, oh, you're just someone that thinks it's cool to hate on things that are popular, and it's
new,
and it's like, Star Wars was the most popular thing ever. Like when we were kids, it was the most popular thing ever.
And mainstream.
Yeah. So don't sit there and tell me that I'm somebody that just likes niche stuff and I don't like it because my thing is the most ultimate mainstream thing that ever was.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm clearly not someone that's against mainstream. So please don't sell me that line of crap.
It's because we're fracturing into the Empire and the Rebels.
Right.
As Star Wars fans.
There's also this line that says, "Well, if you don't like the new movies, then you're clearly not a real fan."
Right.
I don't even know what that means.
I don't either.
But
those people
say
have
it all
a
the
shelf
time.
of Pearl Jam albums.
Look,
yeah,
people can't tell you whether you're a fan or not based on their own fandom.
Right.
All it's required to be a fan of something is to like it and want to know more about it. And it kind of isn't anyone else's business.
Right.
What that is for you. So it is irritating when someone looks at you and says, you're not enough of a fan. It's like, no, I'm exactly the right
Or you
amount.
don't really feel the way you're saying you feel.
Right.
Right.
Because
Like-
it's a personal thing for you, not, I don't know.
You can dislike something that's new, and it's not because it's different or it's new or it's mainstream. You could be hating it for that reason.
It's possible.
But you could also be disliking it because you genuinely dislike it. And you have reasons, like you don't think it's well made or you don't, whatever your reasons are. There are a lot of reasons to like or dislike whatever you like or dislike. And again, not to get too much into, people shouldn't like the new or, they should like the new stuff. It doesn't, to me, that's a moot point because everyone should just like what they like.
Yeah.
I think that when you've been a fan of something for that long and it's so much and you know it inside and out and it's so much a part of you, I feel like your voice is definitely valuable. Whether or not, like, if I'm somebody, I'm not, but if I were somebody who loves the new Star Wars stuff, I would have a hard time as an intelligent person looking at you with all of what you just explained, or you too, Tom, and saying, well, your voice isn't valid.
Right.
Your opinion isn't valid, or, you're just being fill in the blank, a hater. You're just being,
Hey, you paid
a
your
hipster.
dues through the dark times. I mean, that was paying dues for
Right.
Star Wars. You were loving it when there wasn't anything to love for a little while.
Right.
And I'm
Right.
sure there are people who, like you said, went through the dark times and is the same age as you or Tom and, loves the new stuff. That's possible too, and that's totally valid too.
Right.
But it's just to say that you can't tell somebody that they're like, if just because someone disagrees with you, it's not, well, you are just hating on this because of some other reason, because it's not possible for you to genuinely think this sucks.
Right. Right. You're just doing that because you think it's cool to do that. It's like, do you really think that after a lifetime of this,
Right.
that I would just, not like the X because it's cool to do so?
Yeah, that seems really backward to me.
It's like, no, it's like, it is like chasing the dragon in the drug world. Like it's, you are literally hoping that the next film will give you that high that you had, and some people say, well, that's a mistake. You need to lower your expectations. And I'm like, wait a second. You're asking me to lower my expectations on what is literally the most profitable film franchise of all time? You actually want to lower expectations on that? Like,
and then you round it out with, do you know how many years I've wasted on Star Wars?
And how much money?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if anybody would have wanted, to love these movies, it would be you, Michael. Like, I know
you,
that,
Tom.
and you, Tom, but I mean, just from my
And
vantage
you, Melinda.
point, seeing you watch the movies, like I'm almost watching them myself, but I'm watching them through Michael's eyes. And I mean, I've been a fan of something that went from being sort of unknown to being really, really popular, and seeing how that changes everything about it. And it's not because I'm being a hipster and I want to only like stuff that's niche and oddball. It's just that it genuinely changes what it is. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. But I guess I just feel like a need to sort of tell the story of what an original fan feels like when they're, going through the love of a property like this, because it is more than just a movie, which is what people love to toss around, because clearly if anything is not just a movie, it's Star Wars.
If it was just a movie, it couldn't be re-released 20 years later and be the #1 movie in America again and make $200 million.
And then still be
intrinsically
spawning
more
new,
valuable than some countries.
Right.
spawning new movies even now for time immemorial. Apparently, we're going to be having Star Wars for the rest of time. So yeah. Well,
but I know we have to end the podcast, but I just wanted to add that the dark times, when you look back at it, for someone like myself, the dark times are almost oddly comforting. Not because I was the only one. That was the hard part, was being the only one. Not in the sense that you were like alienated in people. Like I said, I didn't have anybody insulting me or anything. Right. But it was exciting in the sense that there was all this material that was coming out that was stuff other people didn't know about. And the moment you showed it to them, they got enthusiastic. Even if it was just for 5 minutes. They were like, oh my gosh, Star Wars isn't dead. I didn't realize I could read about the X-Wing, and oh my gosh, seeing their faces light up when you bring that science project in and it's got that fighter plane or starfighter in it. That was kind of what made the dark times not so dark. I mean, they call it that but I don't see it that way. It's actually one of the best times in my Star Wars fandom, like looking back. Like it was one of the best times. Because there was no contention back then. There was no fan divisiveness. Mm-hmm. There was no, it was just, for the love of the game, So.
Deep thoughts.
Don't hate to play it.
Tom, any final thoughts on the dark times?
Like Michael said, it was called the dark times, but really it just kept going from when I saw it back in 77, 78. It just slowed down slightly and then just kind of revved up again. So. Star Wars for me was never far away during the early 90s, late 80s. It was always there. So, good for me. I'm glad about that. The thing that I would also like to say is, as far as the modern movies, it's great to watch them because I liked Rogue One. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, it's the new movies, I think, are for a different audience. I don't know. I know that a lot of the kids like it, and Star Wars is kind of reinventing itself, for the lack of a better word, for new fans. But like the website, igrewupstarwars.com, shameless plug. You can go there and you can see what it was all about for kids growing up with Star Wars when it first started. And to see that joy and to see that happiness from just having a Star Wars toy, that was what carried us through the dark times. And even if there wasn't going to be a prequels and there wasn't going to be Star Wars was going to go away. 83, that was the last we were going to get a movie. I think, what do you think, Michael? Do you think you'd still be a Star Wars fan nowadays?
Oh yeah, because it would be like every time I would go to a sci-fi convention. Let's say that the new Star Wars movies, prequels, and everything never happened, and I would still be going to science fiction conventions. I would still be doing what I do, and it would be this thing where there would always, I know for a fact, there will always be a group of people that would show up in stormtrooper outfits with their R2 units and stuff.
I think we would still be here, just in a different capacity, but I think we'd still be here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree.
And by that token, my daughters love Ahsoka and Starguy, and that's where
those characters are actually really cool.
And that's where they pick it up. So I'm glad to see that kids, younger folks are getting something.
Well, the torch is being passed. That's what's happening at this point.
To Michael's point, when Star Wars first came out, the audience was everyone. The idea that they're reinventing for a new audience is a little confusing.
Yes, it is. Thank you for saying that. It's so weird. Will a movie that's been brought out in the post Return of the Jedi era, like past Return of the Jedi, can any one of those movies be brought out 20 years after the fact and make #1 at the box office?
Well, I think part of that is wrapped up in a mythology that is very, very common even amongst just so many people say it all the time, and I take a huge exception with it, and that is that Star Wars originally was made for children. And I 100% do not agree with that assessment at all.
Right.
And I'm not saying that kids couldn't watch it and love it. Obviously, you did, and we did. But it was made for everyone. That's why it was so successful. That's the whole point. You're missing the point if you think it was a kids' movie, because it was not. I'm trying to think of a true.
Some people's first exposure were the special editions, and those were clearly bent towards children.
Well, that's the dichotomy between the two original creators. So George Lucas has publicly stated, "Oh, guys, it's a movie for 10 to 12-year-olds." That was like less than 10 years ago when he said that. But
George Lucas does not know his own property very well. We know this.
Michael, did you know that Harrison Ford was in Star Wars?
I did know that. But Gary Kurtz made the statement that the original movies that he worked on with George Lucas were Star Wars and Empire were very carefully designed in the story development process to work on multiple subtextual levels.
Right.
So that anybody watching them from any age group would take something away from it. Now, since Return of the Jedi going forward, maybe he changed the plan. But I'm just saying that I agree with you, Melinda, that it's not the genesis of Star Wars was not just for kids.
So what I'm hearing is we could probably do more on this. Another return.
We'll do an entire episode on was Star Wars truly made for kids, and we will prove it. We will bring evidence to the table.
And while we do that,
we can call it the light side of.
We'll call it the People's Court.
When we do that episode, can we also talk about the AT-AT versus AT-AT?
Yes.
Controversy.
Oh, is it like the GIF thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Just vintage classic Star Wars pet peeves. That'll be a fun
There you
episode.
go. That would be great.
All right, everybody. Well,
I love it.
You can always find Tom Berges hanging out at igrewupstarwars.com and on his Facebook group as well. And you can find Aaron and I at retroblasting.com/Dreamland. And you can send us an email at thedreamlandpodcast@gmail.com. And check out RetroBlasting for all your RetroBlasting retro needs.
On YouTube?
On YouTube.
For all your retro and blasting needs?
That's correct. We're on YouTube, and we're also on Facebook if you like to go on the Facebook. So thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, guys.
Goodbye.